HCD Mindset, your ultimate destination for exploring behavioral science, neuromarketing, and consumer research. I'm your host, Michelle Niedziela. Our guest today is Andrew Livermore. Now, long before his interesting career in consumer product research, Andrew explored the mysteries of memory in lobsters during his academic pursuits. Did you know that lobsters possess an extraordinary memory? In fact, research has shown that they can remember the precise location of food sources and even recognize individual lobsters for up to several years. Imagine that, a crustacean with a memory that rivals your own. Now, with over 2 decades of experience in the CPG industry, Andrew brings his wealth of knowledge and expertise to our table, unraveling the complexities of consumer behavior and product innovation. So join us as we embark on a journey through Andrew's remarkable career, exploring the intricate web of sensory science, psychology, and neurobiology that underpins our understanding of consumer preferences and decision-making. From his groundbreaking work at global giants like Avon and Kellogg, to his role in developing disruptive research methodologies at Curion, Andrew's insights promise to inspire and enlighten us. But before we plunge into the depths of this great discussion, I do urge you to take a moment to like and subscribe to our podcast, ensuring you never miss an episode filled with thought-provoking content. And don't forget to explore the wealth of resources available, including white papers, conference presentations, and more that you can find on our website, www.hcdi.net. So whether you're commuting, working out, or simply unwinding, let's embark on another enlightening journey of knowledge and discovery right here on HCD's Mindset.
Okay.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. And I would like to welcome my good friend, Andrew. So you are here to join us on Mindset. We haven't had you on here before. I can't believe that.
Yeah, we keep kind of running into each other and having amazing conversations about all sorts of stuff. And yeah, we never actually do anything about it.
I think I've actually known you since I started out in industry when I came out
Yeah.
of UNL as a postdoc. And we worked together in our previous lives, right? Now, just to fill in the listeners, who are you and what do you do?
Ooh,
I know it's
at what level are we talking here, Michelle?
okay. So you are Andrew Livermore. What is your elevator speech when you meet someone at a conference? What do you tell them you do?
Ah, that's so boring. Um, so I can tell you where I started. So I started out that I went to college in Australia after high school, and I actually got thrown. I did business, and they threw me out after the first year because I failed too much stuff. I had a GPA of 0.1 or something. They told me never to come back. And
Okay, let's stop right there.
okay,
Because you do have a PhD, right?
yes.
And what I love about that story is that I too was asked to leave my undergraduate program, but I beat you in the sense that I had a 0.8 GPA for
Yeah, I
chemical.
knew you were always smarter than me. Yeah.
So I was going for chemical engineering. Clearly, it was not for me, right?
Yeah.
So business was not for you, is what you're saying.
No, it wasn't, but I really enjoyed the marketing. Well, I didn't really enjoy it. It was just less painful, probably, the marketing piece of it. So I filed that away. And then ironically, later I went back to that same university and I was an academic. So I was a professor at that same university, and they never knew that they'd thrown me out years before after the postdoc.
So what were you saying when you entered college, when you first went there? You wanted to be a businessman?
No, I just didn't know. I was just young and didn't know what I wanted to do. And that seemed like a good idea. I had some friends that were going.
Yeah.
And then I worked, went to Sydney and worked and dug ditches for a few years. And then decided, okay, if I'm going to go back, it was actually my now wife convinced me to go back. And I thought, I'm going to do something that interests me, that motivates me, that I'll do it. So I remembered the marketing piece, but I didn't want to go into business. So the psychology, and I love like British nature documentaries. David Attenborough is like this guy. So I loved behavior and physiology and function and biology, psychology, biology. So I went back and did psychology and biology and just got further into it and loved cognition and behavior and human learning and, all the experimental psych stuff, physiology. And
What
yeah,
first kind of intrigued you to even take a psych course?
well, it was Macquarie University in Australia, so you didn't have to actually nominate
Mm.
everything. You could just end, as long as you ended up with a major, you
Okay.
were okay. So I enrolled in science
Mm.
and then just did biology and psych, experimental psych type subjects till, I finished. And
Fell further down the rabbit hole.
yes, then I did honors. And then I did a PhD in olfaction, physiology, and psychophysics, physiology of olfaction,
Mm.
mainly because that was the best paid scholarship I could get. At that point, I had a child and a family, and I thought, oh, it's olfaction, it's perception. I like perception.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I did that and kind of went down that rabbit hole. Did a postdoc in Georgia, and then I became an academic, and I got really interested in olfaction and memory and emotion,
Yeah.
because emotion was, as you said before, there's so many theories, and there's that old, everyone says, oh, olfaction, limbic system, memory, Proust,
Yeah.
Madeline cookies and stuff, when they've got no idea really, but that's just the
Yeah.
standard.
But people hear that smell is linked to
Yeah.
memories and
So
emotions.
that becomes the introductory section of every paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but really, understanding how it did work and connections between memory and, emotion and olfaction and behavior.
Were you studying humans or?
That was humans, although my postdoc was with lobsters with Chuck Derby in Atlanta, because the lobster model was wonderful,
Yeah.
and he had developed this wonderful model to understand olfaction, because in lobsters their noses are on their antennules, right? So you can
Yeah.
run chemicals through them in water, which is where the olfaction, and so you can rapidly change the olfactory signals that go through to the brain. So you
Right.
can record those signals either from mass cell recordings. So I did some mass cell recordings and I did some patch clamping.
Hmm.
Chuck figured out I wasn't very good at it, so then I went back and did some behavior, and decided that that was a bit too reductionist, and you could patch onto the bottom of a dish and it looked just like action potentials and cellular cross membrane interactions and things. So I thought, hey, this is just as random as psychology. I may as well do psychology. And so yeah, and then was an academic, and I taught like physiology, biophysiology, and perception and learning and cognition to psych students. Some of them
Yeah.
loved me, most of them hated me.
Okay, why did they hate you?
Because psych students, they just want you to tell them what they need to know so they can become clinicians, and
Right.
that's it. Why do I need to know all this
Yeah.
stuff, all this
I just have
reduction
a
stuff?
theory about psych students, going through psychology and academia for quite some time, is that people who study psych, they're typically their interest in psych is like the problem they have, right? So like, right?
Yes. Yep. Or someone in their family. And that was my first lecture. And I'd say, I know you're here either because you're wondering about some troubles within yourself or within someone in your family, and that's okay.
Yeah.
you know, then
Yeah.
I'd say you see nothing in psychopathology that isn't normal human behavior, because
Right.
we've all got the same, engineering, but when it becomes more extremes, it can become dysfunctional. So I tried to kind of settle them down.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So you're an academic and you're
So I'm
teaching
an academic,
ungrateful
then
psych students.
and it's ungrateful, but some of them get captured by it, like I was. They're
Yeah.
just, wow, that's how the brain works. You can
Yeah.
understand, because there's certain fundamental principles about neural processing and
Mhm.
the brain, and if you understand those, you can really understand a lot about how it works and behavior just from those. and
How
emotion
did you
being one
go
of them.
from academia into industry? Like,
I got
threw you to the dark side.
well, I did part of my PhD in Germany with Gerd Kobal and Thomas Hummel. And then I ran into, then I did I had a sabbatical in Germany. So I did some stuff with Thomas there and then traveled around and ran into Gerd in a conference in Vienna.
Mhm.
And he was saying, "Hey, I'm going to America to save the world. Do you want to come?" And it's like, yeah, okay. Tell me a bit more about it. So he'd got an offer. He'd had a couple of offers, but from then Philip Morris, now Altria, to help develop the first generations of reduced harm cigarettes.
Mm.
And the approach was that if you could understand, the sensory, and didn't think behavior before, but the behavior became really obvious later on. If you
Yeah.
could understand the sensory and behavioral factors that drive people to smoking, which is mainly around those, once you burn cigarettes, you create, you go from like 300 chemicals to 30,000 and all these free radicals, and that causes horrible damage. So if you can give people what they're looking for without all that nasty stuff, then, maybe you can, that's a strategy. If people are not killing themselves while they're smoking, but it's a habit, then that's a better situation to be in. So that was a philosophy. So could we understand all this so we could actually put together a device? So that was the first generations of like reduced harm products.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was there for about 7 years, and Philip Morris evolved. And then I thought, okay, I didn't want to go into like cigarettes per se. So I thought, okay, so what can I do with an interest in sensory and behavior? And I thought,
Mm.
food is kind of like smoking. So why don't I do food? So I got a job with IFF,
Mm.
International Flavors and Fragrances, on the flavors side.
Yeah.
Worked with some amazing people. Flavorists are just absolute magicians. And what wonderful people to have to do when you're experimenting on stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And that's when I caught up you was when you were at IFF. And
yeah, yeah,
you struck me as very interesting because I had come in, that was when I was at J&J, and my role was to do exactly that. It was well before anyone's time in, neuromarketing or whatever
yeah,
people call it now. But, the idea of having behavioral sciences and psychological sciences to help us understand how to create products to meet needs, right?
yeah,
It was a
exactly.
novel concept at the time. And I remember, I got brought in to bring this, and then you came in and you were talking about it. And I was like, oh, yes, we're the same. Like, we both are interested in this really esoteric thing, but I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's like what I was saying about some psychology students get it. And I think a lot of people that are in like sensory consumer research get it and love it. And
Yeah.
they'd almost do it if you didn't pay them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just what they love, the puzzle every day, and working out, behavior and how and everything.
That's
Um,
exactly it. When I talk to people
yeah,
about what I do, I mean, this is stuff that nobody really cares to think about. Like, why does your shampoo smell that way? Or, why is this flavor a better one to go with yogurts than a different flavor, right? So this will be one of those ones where we
yes.
together.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so continue on. We're at IFF, right?
At IFF. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're super interested in how consumers are having their needs met through really like a sensory process, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course, IFF was wonderful because the flavorists and the chemists could make up, you're doing a design of experiments, they could make you up perfect, flavors and everything. So if you wanted to, um, for example, like a strawberry yogurt, we'd have a yogurt base, and then the flavorists they could manipulate all the different
Mm.
flavor chemicals in the strawberry to create, a more burnt strawberry or a more green or seedy strawberry or a more jammy strawberry. So they could create all these different things, and you could create a design of experiments, and you could actually by superimposing consumer liking on that, you could understand really, really deep level what is driving liking for strawberry yogurts, right? And
Yeah.
you could manipulate the sweet acid balance, and so you could get really profound understandings of things. We we had butter cookies, and we had a client. They want to understand what happens when cookies go stale and how long can we keep them for. And so we did kind of a staged shelf life study, and we had sensory panels. So we could say, okay, and we had chemists, right? So we could say these particular notes, and it was buttery notes, and it was some other notes and textural things decrease over time. We could track that. And then the chemist could map the chemical changes over time as well. So we could say, this is what's degrading, and these are the chemicals that are oxidizing or disappearing or whatever. So it was a great experience at IFF.
Yeah. And I think it's just really fascinating because I think people don't really know what goes into the creation of the products that they use. And,
Yeah,
there is so much science and, not just the chemistry aspects of creating a lot of the formulation that you're talking about, but also just understanding what it is that consumers want and,
yeah.
why go with something that's more burnt or more jammy for this particular type of product. And so that's a really interesting exploration as well.
Yeah, yeah. And sensory panels allow you to get really fine definitions of that, so you can provide direction to, the flavorists, the product developers on
Yeah.
precisely what they need to change in order to achieve that optimal profile.
Yeah.
Um, but then from there, I went to Avon for a while. And I've spent a career making the case that once you know sensory consumer science, you know the methods, you know how to think about it,
Yeah.
then the product is not irrelevant, but you can catch up on the product side of it.
Yeah.
It's the methodology and the approach and the synthesis and analysis of it that's
And
really
that's a
important.
really another interesting topic is that, I think if you look, 25, 30 years ago, a lot of this space, consumer research, was really more focused on the product, right?
Yeah.
And I think a big change that we've made in probably the past 20 years is becoming more consumer focused.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And of course it's both, right? Because the primary interface when people come across a product is, the sensory attributes. And, we can only pick up on certain of those given the imperfect senses that we have, right?
Yeah.
But what we pick up is also impacted by our past and our memories. We become more sensitive to it, and it comes be tied up with expectation, and it's all associative learning, right?
Yeah.
And then, but they become conditioned to certain emotions, right? So a certain product in a certain sensory format will induce a certain emotion. And if that induces, nostalgia or happiness, or it's associated with previous good experiences, then that's something that's desirable that you want it again. If that's associated with something traumatic, your first mouthful of oysters where you threw
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
or a bad experience with a person, or you went on a bad date or whatever,
Yeah.
then that sensory thing can elicit those emotions, which brings back those memories. So you've got to be aware of the human behind it
Yeah.
as well.
Because
So
humans are really
yeah,
hard to study.
humans are really hard to study.
And that's like the problem in
Yeah,
psychology is that
and they're so variable. Yeah,
it's so variable. And I think that everybody thinks that it should work as a machine. And a big problem with the type of work that we do, where you have measures that are assessing like the psychology and the emotions, these very like, I don't want to say wishy-washy, but these very like changeable items, right? That are very dependent on someone's experience. That's kind of the reason that the social sciences are really hard to validate because, or I'm going to put validation in quotations because, is the measure reliable? Maybe not because people change immediately, right?
there's certain fundamentals, I think, that are stable and
Yeah,
generalized, and others change. And of course, advertisers spend billions of dollars trying to recondition positive experiences to their products, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Coke
It
adds
must
life,
be
you know.
changeable. Yeah.
We taste a Coke and there's the joy of adventure with friends, you know. Uh, Advertisers have understood this for a long, long time, right?
Yeah.
Um, but you're right. And while the sensory is one thing, and it's pretty concrete, there's all this other stuff is so in flux. But I think there's methods that you can use to start understanding some of that variability. Like I think there's segmentation approaches.
Yeah.
Um, that are based on, I like bottom-up segmentation approaches where you're looking at the data and okay, there's these different groups. They like a jammy strawberry, whereas these like a more green seedy strawberry. And okay, why is that? And let's learn about that. And you know, or sunscreens is great examples. You know, some people like something that's really thick and white, and when they use it they can see the protection, you know, and they can see their kids are protected. Other people want something that's easy to spread and smells good and makes them feel good about
Disappears.
themselves,
Yeah.
and others just want something that's going to last all day and not wash off in water.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can understand all these, and there's usually about 3 or 4 key segments, right? And if you can understand what they are looking for, and if you've got the right approaches in terms of psychographics, and if you understand the core needs, jobs to be done, right?
Yeah.
If you understand what their core needs are that they're trying to achieve and those unmet needs, and you can understand who they are and what their lives are like, then you can start to orient products towards them. And that's where you start getting, I think, it's not just about the product. How do you sell to someone who's got a family and is very concerned about protecting their kids?
Yeah.
And how you put this stuff on a squirming toddler? Well, you create the product, but you've got to get them to pick it up. So your communications and your messaging and your claims have all got to be about what's relevant to them. So
Right.
it's a more holistic approach to developing the product and the communications and claims and branding and everything as well. So I think it all ties together.
Yeah. Now you've been on both the client side and the research provider side and the ingredient side. So you've
Yes.
seen a lot of the different pieces that go into putting these products to market, right? Um, Now, when you're talking about all this segmentation and making predictions, like what do you think is what is it that you do that's helping those products be successful?
Um, I think it's everything we've been talking about, right? And it's really my philosophy has always been that the key to developing, you know, effective products in that are successful in market is to understand what people are looking for, right? So understanding what are their needs. So if they're looking for a sunscreen, are they looking for like long-lasting protection? Are they looking for something that's going to repel insects? Are they looking for something that's going to make them smell and look good? Um, and which of those needs are being met and which aren't? And if you can understand that from an emotional perspective, like I want to feel good about myself, right? I want
Yeah.
people to have a positive image of me. Um, you know, I want to feel that it's giving me protection.
Mhm.
If you can understand that, and then you can um, develop your messaging around that, and you can start ideating and developing products that are addressing those important but underserved needs. I think that's the key to successful product development. And then, of course, when you're testing, you need to be testing products to making sure not only that they've got, you know, this much lavender and this much strawberry and this many that's tropical notes or whatever, but you need to be looking at, are they addressing some of these other needs? And so
Yeah.
ticking off that box in product development as well,
Yeah.
all the
Interesting.
way through to post-market surveillance, I think. So it all founds around those sensory, emotional, functional, social needs.
Yeah. So something that we were talking about, before, this recording, was really about that empathy towards those needs. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? You were talking about innovations and research and how we really understand, like, what do you mean by empathy in consumer needs?
I think you need to empathize. It's kind of become a bit of a cliche, but you need to empathize with your consumer,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So you need to understand what concerns them, what's going on in their life, what are they looking for in a certain product, what really drives them crazy,
yeah,
like, the classic story of the Swiffer is that people hated touching that toilet brush.
yeah.
you know, so they want something with a long handle that they can just dispose of.
Right, right.
Brilliant. The Swiffer, nothing else does it. So it's you, so you need to understand the consumer up front, and that's largely qualitative, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
And to get that deep understanding. And then you need to ideate, okay, these people have got these problems. This is what is important. How do we provide a solution that's more effective,
Mhm.
that's cheaper, faster, less expensive, more effective than other things that are currently available? And then, you start to ideate around those solutions, and that then becomes the product, becomes the marketing as well. I think
Yeah,
that it all starts with that deep empathy of your consumer and understanding that, and knowing that you've got different consumers out there that are looking for different things. And I
you
think
can't
what
be everything to everybody.
you can't, and I think that's something that big companies have suffered from,
Yeah,
right? And you hear it if you've ever
yeah,
worked for like the big guys. We're center of the plate. We we can't afford to make these little nichey products. We've got has to be a $100 million product.
yeah,
We're not going to do this. Well, the problem is if you do that, then you're really satisfying no one. So you've got all these segments
yeah,
around here with these different needs. So you're going to develop something there, which is pretty good for everyone, but doesn't really
yeah.
delight anyone. So, but whereas the little guys are saying, hey, look, here's this really interesting opportunity area here. Let's develop a product just for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the secret as
I think
well.
that that's also changed with just how marketing has changed over the years. I mean, now that
Yeah.
things are moving away from, the 30-second ads, right? Where, I mean, that was really owned by those big brands, right? So the big
Yeah.
brands can spend a huge amount of money to put out this, 30-second ad and campaign that's all over the place. But now as things move to Instagram and TikTok, and it's all in these little moments and memes and, influencers, I think that that speaks the language of more products that people are seeing as being for them, right? Because they're
Yep.
watching that
Huge.
influencer because that person's relating to them and it seems more personalized. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think we're seeing these big brands that are starting to struggle with these smaller brands coming in.
Yeah, yeah, because if you're a big brand, it's hard to have 1,000 SKUs, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And you're not making a lot of money necessarily for a lot of output. And despite the fact that they say we've got to be agile, we've got to be more nimble, it still takes them 3 weeks to get a form signed. you know, so I think that there's a struggle
yeah,
at the moment
yeah,
with that.
yeah. Agree. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see where that goes as these large brands start to really grapple with this changing sort of economy. I mean, as Gen Z starts being a bigger spender on products, I think it's really going to throw things for a little bit of a loop.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, what you say is very true. I mean, that personalization and understanding me, this is for me. And one of the things that the two questions that I found to be the most effective in, predicting a successful product
Mm.
is this for you? Is this a product for you?
Yeah,
And the other thing is, would you recommend this to your friends?
yeah,
Because people aren't going to recommend something that isn't really good and that doesn't reflect really well on them, and it isn't doesn't signal them as well.
yeah,
So I think we're starting to learn that.
yeah, yeah.
It's not all about just about liking, I think.
Yeah, I think we know that liking isn't a predictor of sales. But I guess that, that leads us to the big question, something that you and I have talked about for a long time. And, the fearless leader of HCD, Glenn, loved talking about brand harmony, right? And that maybe
Yeah.
something like that really is like the answer to having more successful products. Because liking doesn't predict success. And it does seem to be a big question of what does really predict success.
Yeah. I've had a lot of discussions with Glenn and with you about this. And I think that the product is really an experience,
Yeah.
right? So people will select a certain product, but it's because they have certain needs. But when they use the product, whether it's a sunscreen or a perfume or a toilet brush,
Yeah.
there's a certain experience that's associated with that. It makes them feel in a certain way. They feel responsible, like they're protecting their family. They're not contaminated,
Yeah.
right? Whatever that may be. So it's all about designing that experience for them so they're still living on what's important. And that starts not just with the product, but it starts all the way with, the understanding the needs up front, but also the building expectations. So when you're marketing this, when